Advisory Group. Glad you could join us today. I want to go over a few logistics real quick. So I'm going to share the presentation so we can go over a few things quickly. Today's agenda, our chair, Kim Chevalier, is going to go over the roll call of our members. She's also going to get you to vote for the review of our minutes from our last meeting. Our interim commissioner, Kevin Brown, is going to give us a welcome and intro, as well as Greta, a follow-up on that to set today. Robin Kinney's going to go over our CARES. Misty Higgins is going to share some information on summer professional learning for teachers. Greta and Kay will talk about our reentry options and plans in the fall. Amanda Waldrop is going to go over webcast information for our DoSEs for the NTI webcast that we started in partnership with our special education cooperatives and our early childhood regional RTCs. Damian Sweeney is going to go over mental health information, and Jared Sloan is going to finish us up with CEIS and CCEIS funding. And then we have an exit slip for everyone to do that just has 5 short questions to give a little bit of your feedback. I do want to remind everyone that we have a very full agenda. So presenters, please try to keep your presentations brief, no longer than 15 minutes, and emphasize getting feedback from our DoSEs on this advisory group call. So when Kim calls for the roll call, please turn on your camera. Please unmute your mic before you speak, and then respond when you're called on by Kim. When she reviews the minutes, each member will verbally vote. So Kim will call on you to give your vote, and please respond to the chair for the official review of the last meeting minutes. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim now, and I'll stop sharing so that she can begin. Thanks, Kim.
All right. Good morning, team. It's been an exciting last couple of weeks. We might be one of the last school districts. Our last day is today, so it's exciting for the NTI world. But let's get going because we do have a full plate. So let's call the meeting to order. It's May 27th at 1 p.m. And to take roll, I'll just start going down my list. So just turn on your camera and say your name for me. Wendy Congleton.
Present.
Thank you. Barry Goley.
Present.
Good. Greta Stanfield.
Present.
Tracy Sharp is on vacation this week. Larry Joe Beagley.
Present.
Pam Eklund.
Present.
Good. Mandy Bird.
Present.
Hi, Mandy. Troy Kolb.
Present.
And Kim Chevalier, present. Great. We have a quorum, and do we need to approve the agenda too? Or we go straight to the minutes?
You can go to the minutes, Kim.
Okay, great. All right. Let's to approve the minutes from the March 6th meeting. I need a motion to approve the minutes, please. I need a first.
Larry Begley, I'll make a motion.
Great, thanks, Larry. Seconded by?
Barry Goley, I'll second.
Barry. All right, all in favor? I'll call your names again. You can just unmute your mic. Wendy Congleton?
Yes.
Barry Goley?
Yes.
Greta Stanfield?
Yes.
Larry Joe Beagley?
Yes.
Pam Eklund?
Yes.
Mandy Bird?
Yes.
Okay. Troy Kolb?
Yes.
And Kim Chevalier? Yes. All right, the minutes have been approved, and today with us is Mr. Kevin Brown, who I miss dearly, and Greta, Hilton. So thanks, Kevin, for coming on. We're always interested in what you have to say for us, and so thanks for always supporting us. I did want to say that too.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for your work on this advisory, but most importantly, the work you do every day. I know it's been a heavy lift for everyone, but I particularly know that it's been probably the heaviest lift for the work you do. We obviously did anticipate this type of instruction. You all been doing some incredible work out there in very difficult circumstances. And just I want you to know that does not go unnoticed. Also, this is probably one of the most organized advisory group meetings I've been in thus far. And so that doesn't surprise me, though, because we're dealing with directors of special ed, and that's just who you are. So I'm not going to take a lot of time other than to welcome you. I am going to be on the entire advisory. I think it's important always in even in normal times, but I want to make sure, even though I'm just the interim, I want to make sure I'm hearing what's going on. And I've been trying to be consistent in attending all the advisories, even though we have good staff and they bring that back, even if the commissioner is not able to attend. It's important for me to hear firsthand the challenges you're having, but also the successes that you'll probably share as well. So I'm anxious to hear that. And again, appreciate the work you do. Greta?
Thank you, Commissioner. I really just want to second everything that the Commissioner said. He's exactly right. This is was obviously an unprecedented time, but you guys are rocking it with the work that you're doing in your districts and the way that you're reaching out to support all of your colleagues across the state. It's really incredible. And I am super thankful for the ability to call on each and every one of you just to bounce ideas around. And there just aren't words to express our gratitude in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning for being able to have not only this advisory group, but the diversity of individuals and the experience levels of people to have some of those engaging yet challenging conversations. And you know, our hats off to you, because you're the folks that are doing the hard work out in the district and making NTI happen for all of our kids, especially, you know, some of our students. And I say this about Kentucky School for the Blind and School for the Deaf. If anybody had asked me in February, would we ever submit an application for NTI for KSB and KSD, I would have said, no, we're not going to do that, because one, we don't need to, because there are ways around it. I had no idea that we would do it and do it well. And the same thing for all of you. The prep that went into this was incredible, and the way that you're continuing to provide FAPE for students with disabilities is amazing. So I will stop there because I know we have a really packed agenda, and turn it back over to Kim to move forward.
Kim, if I could, I would add, and I completely agree with what Greta says, but I want to leave you with this before, and I'm going to be on the rest of the meeting, but you may not hear from me. You may have heard me say in other venues that talk about an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal around March 28th. And it talked about, it was a headline, and it talked about how other states and other some school states and some school districts around the country threw in the towel on remote instruction. And the Wall Street Journal article quoted and said it was too tough, and that's why they threw in the towel. And we didn't in Kentucky. And I think one of the reasons we did and we proceeded is because it was hard, and we did the hard thing. I'm not saying that it was perfect. And we know that there are kids that we didn't serve, and there are kids that we don't serve adequately in a normal day, in a normal year. But I just want to make sure you know that not every state proceeded like we did in Kentucky. And I'm not patting the department on the back. I'm saying that to you all. And when we made the decision and the recommendation to move forward with 1,062 hours, we received no complaint from any district superintendent, DoSE, teacher, anyone. Yes, I mean, there were some issues that came up, but when we made that decision, Kentucky as a state and as I call it the education family, said, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to do it to the best of our ability, because we have kids to serve, we have kids to feed. So you all live that every day, you know it, but you also need to know that sometimes our neighbors in other states and other districts around the country did not rise to that challenge. So I just want to thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you both for the partnership. I think it's been a great partnership with the directors of special ed throughout this whole NTI thing that we're doing. So communication has been fabulous, which is very helpful to us. Okay, Ms. Robin Kinney, you're Associate Commissioner. Thank you for being with us, and you're here to talk to us about the CARES funding, correct?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Thanks for having me with you. I'm going to introduce myself. I am the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. As we've presented in front of various advisor groups, we always try to start with a leading question or a guiding question. And so our guiding question for today's presentation is, what recommendations would special education staff offer to your local districts as you learn about the CARES funding? So, and really, I would probably expand that even a little bit more, not just for the CARES funding, but in this unique and uncertain time that we're all faced with. Financial resources are always scarce, but your voice at the table on reminding your districts about the importance of special education and the funds that you need will become even more important as we work through these challenges together. I am going to talk a little bit about the CARES Act, and you've probably heard a little bit about it. It's been very much in the media and in the news. It is, as we always have an acronym, CARES Act stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It was passed by Congress on March 27th, so it's been around for just a little bit. It was a comprehensive funding bill, $2.2 trillion in emergency funding, not just for education, but for other very necessary emergency needs throughout the country, really. But out of that, $30.75 billion is coming to emergency education funding to states. And from that amount, Kentucky is going to receive about $1.73 billion in CARES Act funding, again, across the Commonwealth's needs. Today, I'm going to talk briefly about two pots of money that are really coming to education, specifically to K-12 education. And that is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. We've adopted that as GEAR funds, about $44 million. And the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER, at $193 million. Next slide, please. Looks like we're having a little, oh, there we go. Thank you. Let's start with the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. Kentucky's allocation, again, right at $44 million. We received the notice of the funds, our ability to apply for the funds on April 14th. We have already applied for those funds on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We did that in conjunction with the Cabinet for Education and Workforce. And the Cabinet actually submitted the application on behalf of K-12 education and post-secondary education. In order for us to make this as simple and easy as possible for local school districts, what we are going to require from local school districts is a superintendent assurance. And of course, making sure that superintendents are working with their local boards of education and also with their staff to make sure that they are aware of the availability of funds and what the funds can be used for. When the GEARS Fund first came out, there were actually three types of buckets that the governor could award funds to out of this bucket of money. And if you look at the very first bullet there, the emergency support to school districts that the state education agency deems most significantly impacted by the coronavirus. And in the Commonwealth, since we all kind of ceased our in-person classroom instruction at the same time back in March, Kentucky has taken the position that really all of our local education entities have been significantly impacted. And we're all kind of dealing with the same challenges. We're dealing with food service delivery. We're dealing with how do we continue that NTI, which finally is coming to a close for this school year. So everyone was having the same types of challenges, just maybe a little bit different based upon the size of your or demographics of your organization. So we have taken the position that all of our school districts have been significantly impacted. The other pot that the governor could choose to award funds was for institutes of higher education, and the governor has chosen to appropriate some of these funds to the institutes of higher education. And then there's kind of a catch-all to other higher education institutions, school districts, or education-related entities. Next slide, please. So I guess we have just a little bit of a delay here on the slides. There we go.
Sorry
So
about that, Robin.
That's
It's taking a little bit of time to jump to the next slide.
okay, that's all right. So through the partnership of the governor's office and the support of the Secretary of the Education Workforce Cabinet, who is our Lieutenant Governor, Governor Jacqueline Coleman, the decision was to allocate $30 million out of that $44 million of GEAR funds to support elementary and secondary education. And again, saying that all Kentucky school districts have been significantly impacted, and two large areas that have been advocated and purposed for the use of the GEAR fund. So that $30 million will be allocated to districts to support two big buckets, one being remote learning and technology, and the second bucket being school district food service. So next slide, please. And the remote learning can be all types of ancillary things that require a district to successfully complete that remote learning. And then also technology, which could take the form of computers or additional needs that the school district has to improve those NTI instruction. The second bucket of money is a little bit larger, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or the ESSER fund. The grant is about $193 million. From that, a minimum of 90% of that will be going to local school districts. Again, we had an application period, and the Department of Education has already applied and received approval for receipt of those funds. Very similar to GEARS, we're requiring that district superintendent assurance and conversations with the local boards and staff at the local school district. Different from GEARS, there are broad permissible uses under the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. Any activities that are already authorized under ESSA, IDEA, Perkins, McKinney-Vento, Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, any of those activities that are already permissible, you can expend ESSER funds on. And then there are a whole group of sort of examples of other uses that could be used, which are more directly related to the impact of the coronavirus itself. So anything that districts need to coordinate their emergency response, there will be lots of requirements for cleaning supplies, PPE, personal protective equipment, whether that's hand sanitizer or mask or gloves that will be needed, mental health supports, summer learning. As we look at what has happened as we transitioned out of schools closing with NTI and having the need to work with students over the summer, or maybe teachers over the summer. So very, very broad permissible uses under the Act for ESSER. Next slide. So I've given you a very, very high level. These funds, of course, have already been approved, and it will be on a drawdown request, very similar to other federal programs where a federal cash request will come from your district, and then we will pay out that way. So very similar. Your finance officers have already been kind of briefed, and your superintendents about the flow of funds. But I think most importantly, you know, we would like you to think about, as special education professionals in your district, what opportunities do you see from the CARES funds? Or alternatively, if you don't use the CARES funds for those opportunities, districts may utilize the CARE funds and free up other money for you. So I think we would be interested in hearing on what things that you will make sure that your districts are aware of as they start receiving these funds. So I'm going to stop now and let others jump in.
We just want to go ahead and let them unmute their mic and just speak out, just say your name and ask the questions.
There is on the meeting, there is in the middle of your toolbar, there's a little place that you can actually raise your hand. And I don't know if you all have used that feature before, but that allows people to talk and you're not like talking over top of each other, or you can submit your question in the chat feature.
And Kim, if you have your participant pane open, you'll be able to see a little hand go beside the participant that Robin referenced also.
Okay.
So feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question or a comment or raise your hand.
I do have a question. I can start us off. I have a question, and particularly compensatory ed is going to be a need, and we all know that. That is not new news to us. However, paying for personnel to provide that, that's going to be a big expense for districts because it's obviously going to be after school hours. Is there any discussion about that, about personnel?
So under the permissible uses, it is permitted to pay for salaries from these funds. And I'm going to defer to Greta and her staff because there's always, when we talk about CARES funds and we're talking about maintenance of effort, it's really important that you have that conversation at the same time. But just from the CARES Act itself, salaries are permissible expenditures. I would qualify that by saying, these are one-time funds that go away. And so you don't want to become dependent upon these funds. They should be used for more short-term or temporary type services that may be required. And I see Greta's popped on the screen, so she might want to add to that.
Thanks, Robin. That's exactly right. It is very important to think about the one-time use. And while you're also thinking about that, hopefully that comp ed won't drag on and on and on. So, maybe you could consider about, ways to get creative around, bringing in that person to provide comp ed to get it knocked out, so to speak, and so that it's completed, and then that's a temporary person. Obviously, you wouldn't want to bring someone on long term and then have that expenditure moving forward. The other thing to think about, this is probably the most important piece for special educators to think about, is working very, very closely with your finance officers through this, because while obviously we're supportive of decisions to use, and it's allowable, as Robin mentioned, to use your CARES Act funding for compensatory education, it's critical that you don't do anything to undermine your maintenance of effort requirements under the IDEA. So what you could end up doing, if you're not really super careful, is getting in a situation where you decreased the amount of state or of local dollars, district or local dollars that you have provided for special education and related services for students. And by doing that, then if you lower that, then that would cause a reduction in your MOE and you wouldn't meet those tests, so you could get in a payback situation. And so we put that in the reopening guidance around the exceptional learners piece, because it's critical for you to work with finance officers, make sure that you continue to meet your high water mark, and then move forward. But if you get yourself in a situation where you decreased your local funds by using the CARES Act, then it's going to hit you harder next year and the next year and the next year, thus reducing funds that you would have otherwise had to provide services for students with disabilities.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I know you all have a very full agenda today, and we did give a high-level summary of the CARES Act. Of course, we'll continue to talk with this. I just continue to encourage you to be the voice at the table so that your districts keep special education at the forefront of their minds really throughout the entire pandemic. Whether you're accessing CARES funds or not, you have a very important voice that needs to be heard. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And if you have any questions, my contact information is on the presentation.
Thank you, Robin. We appreciate it. Any updates that we can have is we greatly appreciate for sure. All right, next up is Misty Higgins for Summer Professional Learning for Teachers. Welcome, Misty.
Oh, sorry, I had my mute on. Thank you guys for letting me be here today. I'm Misty Higgins. I know I have not met many of you that are on this call. My role is I'm a professional learning coordinator in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so I'm actually going to share my screen with you. So can you all see it? I know it's kind of loading slow, it sees. Can you all see it? Thumbs up for me.
Yes.
Yep, we
Perfect.
can see it.
So what I'm going to actually be sharing with you all today is some of our professional learning and guidance that we are offering this summer, really around preparing for academic reentry. And, you know, as many of you are well aware, due to the extended remote learning that happened this spring and the way in which we went into that kind of an emergency situation with little preparation, the reality is that many students had some inequities that existed, whether it was in their access to technology, to instruction, whatever the case may have been. Also, we don't know their home situations and the impact that that had on remote learning. But due to those inequities, more students than normal are going to be coming into this next school year with gaps in their understanding of the grade level standards. So our really professional learning and guidance is around how do we prepare for this? And like much of the guidance that's coming out, this guidance is a little different in terms of it is directly for teachers. We do have in there some considerations for leadership in terms of supporting teachers in this work, but most of the heavy lift of the work that's involved in academic reentry is really for the teachers to kind of own, to have a plan in place for when kids come into the fall, whichever scenario that may be, whether it's remote, whether it's in the classroom, that they're able to have a high level plan in place. And then stage 2, which we'll talk about, is really how we begin on a day-to-day basis next year, make those adjustments to our instruction based on formative assessments. So we have 2 stages to academic reentry. The first one is about really the grade level team creating an adjusted curriculum for the 2021 school year. And why it's going to be adjusted is because they have to create time and opportunity to address the knowledge gaps that kids are going to have from this school year due to the extended remote learning. Every year, students are going to move from one grade to the next with some knowledge gaps that may happen. But this remote learning is going to lead to more knowledge gap than we have probably ever seen as kids transition from one year school year to the next. Then once they have an adjusted curriculum in place, this high level plan for what they are going to implement in their classroom next year, stage 2 is all about providing professional learning about using formative assessment to really guide their daily decisions that they're making in the classroom. And I think one thing that's important that we keep stressing is what we don't want to see happen next year is that suddenly we're flooding tier 2 and tier 3 with students supposedly needing intervention, when in reality, for many of them, it could be because they never had the opportunity or exposure to interact with certain grade level standards because of remote learning. So how do we really utilize formative assessment at the tier 1 level, offering strong tier 1 instruction, then using that data to determine what our next steps might be to see if the student may or may not need that extra tier 2 or tier 3 support. So what I quickly want to walk you through, stage 1 professional learning and guidance, we have already fully released. There are 3 sections that each grade level or course content team would work through together. And there are some places in here that I think are really important for our special ed teachers to partner up alongside the grade level teachers, because I think it can help inform their work as well next year. So when they are working on how do we draft an adjusted curriculum, the first step of that, section A, is for the grade level or the course content team to really sit down and analyze their existing curriculum from this school year and see how tightly aligned that is to the grade level standards in the Kentucky Academic Standards documents. One thing that compounds this situation for us is that this happened in a year when we were rolling out multiple sets of new standards. So some schools and districts had not yet had the chance to align their existing curriculum to the new standards. So it really, Section A is about what do we absolutely, at a minimum, need to keep in an adjusted curriculum next year for our students next year to meet the grade level expectations. In any given year, we typically all as teachers add to and enrich our curriculum. We teach things maybe outside of the standards, but the reality of the current situation is that we won't have that time and flexibility next year. So we need to plan going into the school year, looking at what is the minimum we must keep that we have to teach our students in order for them to meet those grade level expectations in the standards. I think this section is really important, if possible, for special ed teachers to be a part of those conversations, because they may not be aware of the new standards. And so it gives them time and opportunity to think about how would we maybe scaffold and support for students, knowing that these are the expectations they're going to have to meet next year. Then once they've looked at what is at a minimum we must keep for the upcoming school year for students to meet grade level standards, Section B is where the content or the grade level team, they sit down together and they are going to identify specifically the content concept skills related to the standards that are tightly aligned to the standards, that's where we believe the gaps will be for the students going into next year because of extended remote learning. What we don't want teachers doing next year is thinking that they're just going to have to reteach everything from this year to the full depth that they would have, or that they just need to move on. What we want is teachers providing each other with that critical information of where do we see the gaps are going to be because of the remote learning, so that the teachers in the next grade level up can build that into their adjusted curriculum. One of the reasons I think that step is critically important for special ed teachers to be a part of in Section B or have access to that information. Again, one thing we want to avoid next year is like some people trying to fast track kids into special ed. Like there's a big difference between having knowledge gaps because you didn't have the exposure and the opportunity that you would have in a normal classroom setting. We need to make sure that we're addressing where those gaps are, providing students with Tier 1 instruction, then gathering data to see what are the needs of our students once they have that time, opportunity, and exposure to those standards from the remote learning. So we just think that it'd be really important for the special ed teachers to be a part of the work in this stage so that they can see that information and help it to inform as we're looking at special ed referrals next year, making sure that we're not just kind of, like I said, fast tracking kids to special ed, that's not the case of what's going on. So they use that work from Section A and B to draft an adjusted curriculum for next year. That includes the gaps that kids are going to come in with due to extended remote learning, and then that minimum that must be kept for students to meet grade level standards. All of the work for Stage 1 professional learning and guidance has been released. You can see all the supporting resources listed there, but just know that you can go to the COVID-19 webpage on the KDE website to access all of those. There is a guidance packet, and it's a very specific guidance packet in terms of it is step-by-step for teachers as they walk through this process. It gives them all the tables, the graphic organizers they need to then come out of it with that adjusted curriculum for next year. It does also include those leadership considerations of some ways that they can support teachers as they move through this process. And then quickly, I just want to tell you about Stage 2. So this portion of the professional learning will come out in July. So we're really trying to be responsive to what we see as the needs of teachers in terms of starting this next school year. So once they have this adjusted curriculum in place, as they begin to implement it next year, it's really professional learning around how to utilize formative assessment, that process of formative assessment to really inform instruction. We are going to focus on 3 specific areas in that professional learning: how they can elicit evidence of student learning, like how do we know that we're getting the right type of evidence that we need? How do we provide feedback to our learners that actually moves learning forward? And then how as teachers do we use that data to adjust our instruction first at the Tier 1 level before we just start throwing kids into Tier 2 interventions? And again, being responsive to needs. In this guidance, we will provide just general best practice guidance, as well as what would that look like in a classroom setting and what would that look like in a virtual setting. We've been in a lot of groups, and some of the feedback that we're getting is that teachers really struggled with providing feedback and doing formative assessment well in the virtual setting. So we want to make sure within that guidance, we're providing professional learning for teachers to see how that could look both in the classroom setting and in the virtual setting. And the resources for stage 2, like I said, that's going to come out in July. You can see on the screen all of the pieces that will go along with supporting that. But the goal is that we're going to release it all at the same time, that we are going to have a live webcast. So we'll host a live webcast for leadership on the day that we release all of this for stage 2, so that they have that overview of what the purpose of stage 2 resources are. And then they can really point their teachers where to go to find that information. But again, we're just trying to be responsive. So while we definitely have some content specific professional learning out there, general professional learning around standards, we're focusing this summer on what do we see as the needs teachers have in preparing for the next school year. And so that's really my question I would like to pose to you all is, as you have talked with teachers in your districts, what are you seeing as the needs that they have in terms of professional learning? Like really either because it's due to this unique situation or in general, this has just been a need that they've had. And same thing, feel free to unmute your mic. I'm going to show you a place where you can send questions or suggestions in just a second. But again, we really want to use your feedback to kind of inform our work so that we can be responsive to what we're seeing as the needs out there. Okay, I will show you then where you can send any more information. You can see I put some places there if you wanted very content specific, kind of traditional professional learning opportunities in some online modules. You can find those at KY Standards or on the Professional Learning Bulletin Board. But if you have any suggestions or feedback for us or any questions, you can send those to standards@education.ky.gov.
Misty, I did just have a suggestion or not necessarily a question. I think it's essential during this time and while we are discussing PD with educators, I think we need to be very critical in using common language with all educators. I guess what I'm saying is exceptional children, not just special education, exceptional children overall tends to be a second thought when we're talking about professional development. And I'm an honest person. That needs to come from the academic side also, from when you all are having discussions. It shouldn't be in, oh, and also remember to invite your special, it should be encompassing in conversation every time they're talking about standards, etc. It should be just common language. So I just feel like using the same language across all educators would help in our world, and I know it would help in EL, etc.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts, feedback, suggestions?
This is Joe. I would just remind the DoSE advisory group members that you each represent a region of the state. We have 9 people here, and so the expectation is that you're taking this information back and you're sharing that in your region so that other leaders and educators are aware of the opportunities that we're planning. So the communication is an important piece of this group. I just want to encourage you all to share the information.
Okay, again, you have that email where to send it, and thank you all for letting me take a little time in your meeting today.
Thank you, Misty. We appreciate it. Okay, Greta, are you next up for re-entry in the fall?
Hi, so I don't have slides to show you because I really wanted this to be more of a conversational item, particularly because This is the group of special educators who should be helping us think about all of those questions, because the truth is we all have more questions than we have answers right now. But there are a couple of things that I do want to touch on, and those of you who saw the superintendent webcast last week heard me sharing these items, but I want to talk to you a little bit about as we go back, and really this is spinning off the comment you just made, Kim, about students with disabilities as well as all exceptional learners should really be at the forefront of the conversation, because as we're planning to go back, it's so important that we consider several buckets of thoughts, really, and the first being equity and access. It's vital for our students with disabilities, our students, young learners, our gifted and talented kids, our twice exceptional kids, just diverse kids, unique individuals. It's so important that we ensure decisions that are made during the reopening don't discriminate inadvertently against these kids. We need to be sure that districts are considering conversations around least restrictive environment for students with disabilities, and we need to be ensuring that ARCs are convening to have those conversations about the least restrictive environment. Depending on what school looks like going forward, the least restrictive environment for students with disabilities may change. One of the things that we heard across the nation when we were first facing the pandemic was, should prior written notice be provided to parents because there's a change of placement for kids with IEPs, and because of the great work that you guys do and many of the team at KDE, we came out initially and said, no, this is not a change of placement. This is a change of location. Everybody's changing location as a result of the pandemic. It didn't change the placement for the least restrictive environment of kids, and that quickly, I think some other states, it took them a while to get on board. And going back to what Commissioner Brown said this morning about, or this earlier when we first started, not only do the days run together, but the time is running together for me as well. But when we first started, about how some states really had trouble switching to this model because it was hard. Well, thinking about that through the more narrow lens of special education, there were several states who simply shut down schools. They closed their doors to remote learning and said, we're not doing any instruction because we believe that we can't provide instruction to students with disabilities. Therefore, we won't provide instruction to anybody, and that'll give us a pass, and we can't go through any due process situations because nobody's being educated. That didn't last too long because it didn't take people very long to understand that this wasn't going to be a 2-week phase. So schools shut down for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then they opened back up, and then they had to figure it out. So, and part of that conversation was the placement location issue. So, thinking about, though, when we do open up to in-person classes, we know we're going to have students who may be medically fragile, who can't access certain parts of the environment because of safety or health reasons, or because of their disability. We may have situations where students, where families just aren't comfortable for students to go, and it may be a result of a disability. And those are the situations where ARCs need to be involved. Not saying that the ARC needs to make the decision for every student, because there will be situations in which parents say, I'm just not comfortable. It's not the basis of a disability. It's not a special education issue, but this is what we may choose for our child. And that's a completely different situation. The other components to think about really is the bucket of compensatory education. And this is the question right now in special education that's buzzing around the nation. It's a heated conversation. It is a tough conversation. And there's several schools of thought out there right now. And just, in the spirit of full transparency, I will tell you that there are some movers and shakers who want to avoid, at the national level, who want to avoid the use of the term comp ed at all cost. There's a school of thought around this being unfinished learning, and it's unfinished because of the pandemic rather than interrupted learning that denied FAPE because of the district's choices, which is true. That's a true statement. But the reality is, and it just, just talking about this, there's webinars out there that have been recorded, and it's in writing from OSEP when they said FAPE will look different. Think about providing FAPE through an alternate form, right? And so when, when I met with you guys and staff from the Office of Special Education and Early Learning met with all of the directors, and we said, document the minutes missed. And we had a little bit of pushback about that because it's hard. It's hard to document the minutes missed. But the purpose for that, of documenting those minutes and having conversations with parents, was so if there was a service that you simply couldn't provide because of health and safety for students and staff, and you still had conversations with parents who, for the most part, understand because they don't want their kids infected any more than we want to be infected or want our children infected, then you document all of that moving forward, and then you and the families understand that this will be made up in the future. Whether you want to call it comp ed or unfinished learning, whatever fancy term we want to put on it, it's still a compensatory education situation, right? But that is the remedy for denial of FAPE. And the denial of FAPE, regardless of why it happened, it happened. If you have a situation in which students were, their AP stated that they received 30 minutes a day of speech services, and you provided 20 minutes a day of online speech services. But when you go back to school, you document these services were provided, though it wasn't a minute per minute approach, but the student continued to make progress in light of the situation. The ARC may determine there was not a denial of FAPE and no reason to provide comp ed. So I say this, the reason that I think we are really taking the stance of not shying away from KD, or at KD not shying away from the term comp ed, is because sometimes I feel like if we do shy away from these hard conversations, it makes it a little bit more adversarial, because parents and advocacy groups wonder, what are you hiding if you're afraid to talk about it? And if you just hit it head on to say, yes, sometimes there's a denial of FAPE, and sometimes it's not our fault, but we're going to work through it, and we're going to educate kids, and we're going to do the very best we can, even though we're going through the most impossible situation that we could imagine, and we're going to do it together, then it seems, like that's your reasonable solution to this. And if you do go to a due process or any type of dispute resolution, what's the reasonable remedy? Well, then you've already documented that. You've already got that planned. It's the situations in which, districts, and this is far and few between, but, taking the approach of not communicating with parents, or I'm unable to do this and there's really no point in talking about it. We just aren't going to do it. We'll deal with it in September. Those are the kinds of situations that, could really come back to haunt districts moving forward. And it's troubling for parents because as a parent, if my kids were still in school, I'd want to know what the plan was moving forward, and that's a reasonable expectation. So that's the piece with comp ed. I would say don't enter into this whole compensatory education situation as a blanket approach for all kids with an IEP are getting comp ed, because I don't think they're all entitled to that. But at the same time, I wouldn't shy away from it saying that no kids should be afforded comp ed. And I don't know how many of you subscribe to LRP, but last week they had a pretty good webinar that really went through the different situations in which compensatory education might be a component moving forward and might not be. But really the bottom line is if a denial of FAPE occurred, the remedy for that is comp ed. That's the only remedy for denial of FAPE. Progress monitoring, that again, that's so huge. That's why we advise to document all of the services provided and the services not provided. So when you go forward and you think about, large districts are going to be overwhelmed, and maybe even small districts because they may not have as many staff, but it could be overwhelming to look at the number of ARC meetings that you may have to engage in. But having that documentation in front of you from those case managers hopefully will help you prioritize where those needs are. So if you have kids who have significant disabilities or even, a complex disability, and who were not provided services, obviously those are the kids that you would prioritize first. If you have students who for the most part received all of their services, but you really want to examine the progress, you can look at progress outside of the ARC, and you should be looking at progress outside of the ARC. And then when you may determine that the committee may determine that it's not, an ARC is not needed immediately, so the reeval may be late fall, and you want to take the data to the table, later in the year. Just having that documentation will help you prioritize. Also, it'll help you with any regression assessments to determine if ESY is warranted. We're working currently on guidance around the differences between ESY, extended school year, and Comp Ed. This is probably one of the biggest sources of confusion across the nation in the special education community. People tend to use these, or often use these terms interchangeably, and they are not the same. ESY, and this is the short, oversimplified response, but ESY is really about recoupment and retention of skills that have been taught. And Comp Ed is around the denial of FAPE, or possibly skills that weren't taught. There's a Sixth Circuit decision around ESY that's binding for us. And ESY can be part of FAPE. It could just be part of what you're planning for a student because a student has regression issues. And it's also important to note that ESY and Comp Ed can occur simultaneously. A kid could be owed both components of instruction. So that's something to think about. And then lastly, another big piece is the emergency contingency plan. And quite honestly, I think most states weren't good about thinking about contingency plans. And excuse me, it's allowable in the IDEA. We just didn't foresee, I think, a time when we might have like widespread school closures or widespread remote learning. And there are some districts that I've heard from, as I've talked about this, that have said, we did do some sort of contingency planning, obviously not for a pandemic, but we did think about certain situations with students who may be transient or may, have various needs at home that might require them to be elsewhere for an extended period of time. And if you have done something like that on an individual level, it's really just about thinking, how do you do it more broadly while maintaining the individuality of each kid's needs? So in thinking forward, if we had had contingency planning as part of the IEPs, we would have already had a process for, how would we go to full remote learning for students with disabilities through NTI? And in thinking about Kentucky's structure, it would be reasonable for districts and ARC meetings, as you're thinking through the IEP planning and those annual reevals, to think about moving to NTI and moving each individual student. What does that look like? But definitely bringing your folks in that are drafting your NTI plan to talk about what does it look like for remote learning for students with disabilities. And there will never be a better time to do it than right now as we come out of it, because we know exactly what we didn't have for this semester, right? And so we know, in thinking about Jefferson County and, 6,000 hotspots and all of the things like that you had to put in place, and you had to pause for a second to think about, how do we service 13,000 kids with disabilities when, this group may have access to the internet and this group doesn't? And the same thing back home in Eastern Kentucky, they went through the same thing in a much smaller scale, and worked with the local internet and telephone provider to set up hotspots like in the local park and some of the high school and middle school parking lots, and even some like roadside rest areas that used to be for carpooling across the county, so that parents and kids could drive into those areas to submit work, through hotspots, which is, it's not ideal, but it's something. And so, just thinking about that as we move forward. But those are just some thoughts I wanted to throw out to you. But really, the purpose of this is for you to help us think about, how do we answer some of these guiding questions? What do we need to prepare for, at the state level or across the state at the district level, or even through our co-ops and our regional training centers at the regional level? What would help you and all districts move forward to the maximum extent possible to ensure not just the floor of special education is achieved, but definitely achieve the floor and provide faith, but also to open up all the possibilities for students with disabilities. So I'll stop there and let you guys ask some questions. Or if any of my folks from OCL want to weigh in with anything that I might have forgotten to add or comments, that'd be great too.
This is Barry Gully from Logan County, and one of the new different caveats that we're seeing, and it's already starting, is that so many families are, I don't know if out of fear, out of apprehension, are withdrawing their children to homeschool. And I'm already in many of those, well, I won't say many, some of those are students with IEPs. So we're already seeing families starting to make those preparations without even having any idea what we have as part of our reentry plan. But I've already had 2 different families withdraw for next year to homeschool. And so, we're having discussions now with those teachers on at least trying to continue providing some type of service plan for those students. But I'm afraid that we're going to see, a potential decrease in the number of students with IEPs. So I have to kind of start thinking about that. And I haven't talked with other directors in our region, the GREC region, but that is always a potential that we're going to see families too scared to send their kids back to school.
It's a really good point. That's the first time that I've heard that mentioned. I'm not surprised by it, but it's a thought. And then, in thinking about that, Barry, there's also the thought about, private school proportionate amount, and the requirements for districts and what they provide through private schools and things of that nature to think through as well.
Absolutely.
Related to that, if I could add, we're hearing from some districts that they're considering a hybrid model, which I think to some degree most all districts will probably end up going with. And what that means is you're probably going to have a portion of your students that are going to be coming back into the classroom. Some of those may still have to be socially distanced in that you are having alternating schedules or days, but then of that total amount that you would normally have, there'll be a percentage that you just described, Barry, that either are afraid to come back, or maybe they live in a home with a grandparent or another person that is medically fragile and they don't want the exposure from the child being around other kids and then bringing something home. And so some districts are talking about surveying their parents and guardians over the summer to determine what that amount, the number of those kids are going to be, and then providing a hybrid teaching virtual so basically an NTI program for some students, and in-class experience, a normal experience as much as it can be, so as long as we're in COVID for the balance. And then we're already moving at the state level to give some regulatory and statutory relief for that model, because the statutes and regulations, the funding, the attendance, it doesn't recognize some students being on NTI and some students not being on NTI. Of course, it recognizes home hospital, but this isn't really home hospital. This is something between home hospital and regular attendance, and we don't recognize that. We will next semester, because we are going to have some type of an executive order that assists districts in going to that model.
This is Kim. The one component of reentry that I would say I'm most worried about is behavior and SEM. I know SEM is working with their teams, but the safety for our staff and students with restraint and seclusion. It's just very difficult, and how do we make it equitable And let's just face it, you know, with our union and what we have, it's going to be a very tough call for us to get on the same page with that. So any guidance with students with behavior needs.
That's a very good point, Kim, and that's some of the conversations that we're having. And we've had that conversation on the NASD board, the National Association for State Directors, because what we anticipate, especially those of us whose background is behavior, is that after kids have been away for a while and the structures are not in place, and we have the added stressor and the trauma of the pandemic, and kids have family members who are sick or you know, people that have passed in their families, that behavior is going to escalate. And to compound that problem, we're going to have escalating behavior and then stressed adults responding to that behavior, which could be a really bad combination. So, you know, unfortunately, there's no good answer for that. And, you know, we can continue to go back to the conversations over and over and over about, you know, PBIS and trauma-informed care and social emotional learning. And Jefferson County's done a really good job of implementing so many of those programs, as are many of the districts. But I think, you know, as we go back, some of this we're going to have to learn as we go, because we're really going to have to pause. And much of the MTSS approach right now, I think, is going to be providing supports for adults in order for them to provide adequate supports for our kids. And you know, the how of that's going to be complex, especially at a time when districts are going to be feeling the financial burdens of the pandemic, but they're going to need more money to engage in some of these programs. So there's just no good answer. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for that, but I appreciate you asking the question. It keeps it on the front burner of conversations with everyone, and we definitely will continue. This is something we work across the agency. This, you know, it's not just our office. It's so many others that are involved in the MTSS and the counseling lens and things of that nature. So it's a very good and engaging conversation. The other thing that I do want to mention while we're talking about reopening is we've gotten several questions from districts around is it safe to go ahead with evaluations, because obviously people are stressed about some evaluations being out of timeline, and it doesn't appear that we're going to get much relief from US Ed in way of flexibilities for the IDEA, and it doesn't appear that we may get a lot of flexibility from Congress. As you know, DoSE has requested some flexibility for timelines, but that's really about all. And there are many other components of IDEA that would have lended itself to flexibilities without waivers of FATE. And so without that, many districts are feeling very stressed about getting their reevaluations and evaluations conducted. So we've had a lot of questions about, is it safe to have one-on-one evaluations if everyone's wearing the appropriate PPE? And the guidance from that has been, you know, to contact your local health departments, because they are the experts in the public health arena. And so I think most people have reached out to do that. But just know that is, if you haven't experienced it, that's something that's going to come up in your regions. And we're really leaning on health departments to help us with that. And then we also have Kay Kennedy on the line. Kay, do you have anything that you would like to add as far as the reopening guidance or recommendations?
Thank you, Greta. I would just like to encourage everyone to take a look at the reopening initial guidance documents. The couple of components in there I think are probably pretty important, in addition to the work you normally do, but it's just around health and safety for all students, and then how district operations will enter into the conversation about how are we going to get kids to school safely, and how are we going to operate in a safe manner. So your ability to contribute to those conversations, aside from your area of expertise and other factors that need to be considered, it's very much, an operational, get down to basics kind of question, or how are we going to get kids there? How are we going to feed them? And how are we going to keep the place clean enough for both students and staff to feel safe and to be healthy? So I don't want to elaborate a lot, Greta, but just if you do have questions and would like to send those as well, be happy to try to answer any of those. Thank you.
Great. Troy, did you have a question? I saw you pop up and I just want to make sure we don't skip over you.
Yeah, I actually was going to chime in. I didn't want to be rude and interrupt anybody, so I was going to raise my hand here in a second. A couple things that I was thinking of. One, you were talking about the worrying about safe crisis management. That's a big concern we've had as well. I also think of it in terms of educating our MSD population. They have a lot of personal needs, so we're going to be subjecting our staff, and I hate to say that word, that isn't a good word, but they'll be required to attend to some very personal needs of these students if they're in our buildings. And what's that going to look like? How is that even possible to adhere to safety guidelines for both the students and our staff? So that's one concern that I have. And then the other one, just really just sort of off topic from that, is I know that I personally have really underestimated the effect that this whole situation has had on students. I have two teenagers. One's a senior this year, graduating from Louisville Male High School, and it's been traumatic for him to just have his year just ended all of a sudden like that. And then I have a daughter also at Male, and she'll be a senior next year. But I just underestimated just really how traumatic this whole thing was. They're pretty well-rounded, adjusted, social. They have a lot of things, going for them. They're involved in a lot of things. They have a lot of friends, but they fluctuate with the anxiety and the stress, the sometimes borderline depression that our situation brings. So I bring that up to say, we got a lot of kids that are going to be coming to us in some unusual way, some hybrid way, whatever that looks like in the fall. And school is just, they're not going to be mentally ready to handle whatever we decide school's going to look like. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Troy. I totally agree. Hey, anyone else quickly?
I have a question or a comment. I am from the Western Kentucky Co-op, so all the way at the end. And I know a lot of my fellow directors are concerned about implementing correct contingency plans for their students. I think we all agree that obviously that was something that was needed, and we wish we had more forethought on that before all this happened. But, when we're talking, we had a virtual meeting last week. And so when we were talking about things that we need, I think a little bit more specific guidance in maybe what needs to be addressed. Not so much that you're, give us a check sheet or something, but just some of those areas to make sure that we address. A lot of people are probably in the position that I am in, and I am finding through the documentation of our services and things like that there's a lot of work I need to do overall, not just for contingency plans or NTI, but for all instruction. And so it's a huge, it's not just asking the teachers to kind of do one more thing. I'm like, we're trying to eat the elephant and we're trying to go bite by bite, but it's hard. So I just know that was a lot of discussion. We don't want to make it too hard, but yet we don't want to make it not effective. And we know it needs to be individual. I mean, none of us are, wanting like a blanket thing, but for that. And then also, we had a lot of problem with the disengagement. And I'm sure all districts dealt with that too, where towards the end of our school year, we kept getting less involvement and less interaction with students and things like that. And I guess, I don't know if I'm just asking for assurance or some way to document, but my teachers were really concerned because they couldn't document minutes served because students stopped answering the phone, students stopped participating. And I think that that's just something that they're scared of. If we go back to this, it's going to happen again. And of course, I know we need to work on within our district things for engagement and online things and stuff like that. But I think that we're just all kind of overwhelmed because, like I said, we kind of have found things we need to work on. Otherwise, this is on top of that. And, our teachers are just kind of at the max limit of what we can ask them to do. And I'm hoping during the summer, since we're going to have a, much longer summer than typical, that if there's any kind of guidance or structures or anything that I could share, that would be helpful. And that's just something my directors wanted me to bring up today specifically. But like I said, I doubt we're alone in that, in all of those.
No, you're definitely not alone. One of the things, Wendy, to your point about the lack of engagement, the requirement for making FAPE available doesn't change whether it's remote learning or face-to-face. And we often have times have trouble with engagement, especially for certain populations of students, even in face-to-face instruction. So I think the key to that component or to that question is documenting those attempts made when students or parents didn't answer or weren't responsive, because that shows the reasonable effort on the district's behalf to make FAPE available. It goes back to the old saying about leading a horse to water, right? But you can't make it drink. But you do have the burden of making that available. And so I think the documentation of that shows the effort on behalf of the district in the event that, the student A doesn't make progress or there is a dispute resolution process that's, invoked in the future. So at any rate, I know that's not a great answer, but it's something. But as you were talking, one of the things that I would like for us to explore a little further as we continue to move forward, with certain components of guidance, and Amanda Waldrop's on, and she's going to talk quickly about upcoming webinars. I really appreciated the help and support of our co-ops and RTCs. As we wound down through, I started to say RTI, through NTI and all of the webinars that they, really was topical bursts of information, and those seem to be very well received and very helpful across the field. And as we move forward, we really want to hear from you about what are the topics that we need to include in those webinars. Sometimes it's easier to hop on and listen to 30 minutes of information than it is to read a full guidance document, right? So how can we do that while we're working on guidance? And we may want to create some additional work groups, and we may call on you guys to help us think through some of our guidance, because you are the voice of the field and we really value your thoughts. So those are just some thoughts that I'm having as we're talking through this. So I will, I'll stop talking now and see if Kim wants to move on. I'm not sure where we are on the agenda, or if you guys have additional questions.
Can I ask a question? This is Pam from Boone County.
Mm-hmm. No way, Pam, you can't.
Thank you. Just real quick, so with this contingency plan, is there kind of any specific language we need to be putting in these IEPs, conference summaries that will help support what we need? Have you guys thought that through or anything?
We've not thought it through as well as we need to be honest. There's nothing in the IDEA or the implementing regulations that say a contingency plan must have X. It really is just about how to meet the needs of the student in the event of whatever emergency situation comes up. So my knee-jerk reaction with limited time to think about this is, in thinking about virtual learning or remote instruction, what do you need to ensure that FAPE is made available to that kid? And it may simply be, we have hotspots available, we have points of contact on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or we have, every Friday contact, or we have Google Classroom, or whatever that is for each individual kid. I don't think, the contingency plan should be part of the IEP, essentially your fallback IEP, should you go to remote instruction. But it won't be so far away from the IEP that you wouldn't have the same goals and objectives. So I don't think it's this long drawn out plan, but rather the communication between the families and the district, so that everybody knows, who's on first in the event that you go back to, full remote instruction, or if it's a hybrid model, or if it's, who knows what. I think districts are going to get really creative in the fall. So, in thinking about what districts are doing and what your district may be offering, and then how do you make FAPE available through that model?
So are you looking at these need to be ARCs as we start the new year to build this contingency plan? Or do you see this being able to happen as their annuals come up? Because again, sometimes that's a lot of kids for us.
From the realistic approach, I would say
yes, that's kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah. If I were in the field and I was doing this, I would do it as annuals come up. I wouldn't try to have dozens, thousands of ARC meetings to get these built in, because the reality is, when we entered, we're already in the midst of this pandemic, and we didn't have time to build contingency plans before we got here, right? So you've already had communications with parents. They already know what's happening, and you may have to have some conversations. You may have to have ARC meetings, because you may have some parents who just say, no, I need a meeting. But then you're going to have other parents who say, yeah, look, this is the way the world is right now. We just want to know that little Greta's going to be serviced. And I wouldn't, at the end of the day, and this is Greta Hilton, not state director, and legal may not agree, but we want to make sure the kids are serviced, and that we're providing all the supports, and we're making the good faith effort, much more so than we want to make sure all the boxes are checked in Infinite Campus.
Well, I totally agree with that, Greta, but that's not how the way compliance officers and due process they look at it. So I'm just kind of trying to have that conversation. So I have one other question regarding this. So in these contingency plans that we build in that become part of the IEP, do you believe, is it that we identify kind of service minutes to the LRE? Would we describe that in two different settings, or just kind of discuss the plan and kind of outline it, but not necessarily put it in minute wise? Is that what you are recommending?
That's what I would do. Because if you think about alternate form of FAPE, then I don't know if, as you move forward into an emergency contingency plan, if you could say, look, this is our contingency plan, and we're going to meet with you every Wednesday from 3 to 3:30. Because what happens if the teacher gets sick, or if I wouldn't restrict the kid or the district or anybody involved to this narrow box. I would keep it more along the lines of, this is how we're going to provide FAPE by doing X, Y, or Z.
Kind of similar to what we did when we went into it. We developed individual plans with each parent. Okay.
And to further complicate matters, and I just want to make sure you know what we're telling your superintendents if they haven't shared it with you. Your school district will be submitting to us by July 31st your calendar for next year. That's an extension of time that you would normally submit it earlier, but it's very unlikely the calendar that's submitted on or before July 31st will be the calendar that you stick to, even by probably the first part of September, because we just don't know. There could be a fall spike in cases. There may not be a fall spike in cases. There could be a spike in Jefferson County, but not in Kenton County, and public health may start, offering guidance to some parts of the state and not others. And so That's another layer that, and we're telling superintendents to kind of think of it as your July 31st calendar for your school year is one play. And we all hope that that play is the one we run and we have no deviations. But you need to have a playbook back at your central office for various scenarios, hybrid models, NTI, pivoting quickly over to NTI within just a few days' notice, et cetera. So that's how we're guiding superintendents to try to be ready for that. And Dr. Stack spoke to the superintendents yesterday, and we are hoping, and he is hoping, that in sometime in June, they will have a little bit better idea of what the virus is likely to do, but it still is very much an unknown.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Pam, one of the things I was going to tell you that all the schools have to provide a plan, for that reentry. So like our teams are on that, and I'm waiting for those to get completed before we start contingency plans. And I'll tell you why, because one, special ed is already on those teams, and two, they're looking at health, they're looking at behavior, they're looking at technology. So I just think of it as like the big buckets, and how does that transition to that particular kid?
Yeah, we have the big bucket look. We have that, but it just kind of looking at how to, because my teachers worry about how to document it, because very conscientious of doing the right thing.
Right, like does it go on the conference summary, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or do we create it? That was my biggest thing, because then it doesn't transfer with the child when the child leaves. So yes, okay. Great, thank you. All right, time to move on. Amanda, you're up next for the webcast for the DoSE.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. My name is Amanda Waldrop. I'm the Assistant Director of the Division of IDEA Implementation and Preschool here at the Kentucky Department of Education. I'm here today to get your all's input on the webcasts that were provided during April and early May of this year. And I posted the link to the webpage there in the chat box, so you all are able to go and look at the archived webcasts that are up on our website right now. Before we open up the conversation, I'd like to give you all a quick overview of the webcast in case you were unable to participate. So the Office of Special Education and Early Learning here at the department partnered with the Special Education Regional Cooperatives and the Early Childhood Regional Training Centers to begin a webcast series that would provide instructional resources to districts to support students with disabilities during non-traditional instruction. This was a partnership with all 9 regional cooperatives as well as all 5 regional training centers. These webcasts were conducted on a weekly basis in April and the beginning of May. And there were a total of 12 webcasts among the cooperatives and the regional training centers. The webcasts were recorded and archived on the Special Education Instructional Resources webpage on the KDE website to allow for them to be viewed at a later time or distributed to teachers and staff. And so because of the positive response from districts and through the surveys that were provided at the end of the webcast, as well as through qualitative data that we'd received through emails or calls, we're considering moving forward with additional webcasts for districts on instruction and resources to support students with disabilities. And so now I really would like to open it up to you all to get your feedback and input in terms of the webcast and what you all would like to see next. So what I'm going to do really quickly is display my screen so that you all can see the topics that were covered. Let's see. All right. Can you all see that okay?
Yep, it's showing up, Amanda. We see it.
Okay, great, thanks. So you can see there the topics that were covered, the ones that were covered for special education, those were in partnership with our special education regional cooperatives. And then you can also see the preschool topics that were covered as well with our early childhood regional training centers. So one of the first things that we'd like to get your all's input on is, were the webcasts overall helpful? And whether that's feedback from you as a participant, or if you had staff or other folks that participated, what are your thoughts in general about the webcasts, and were they helpful overall?
Any suggestions for Amanda? I mean, I didn't get to watch very many of them, but I mean, as always, they are absolutely, helpful because anytime we can see a webcast like that, that is something that is ongoing. So that is one thing that we are learning with NTI and providing virtual learning, that it's consistent and continual.
Right.
So it's the same message. So these can be used over and over again. So I do appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Kim, I think that's a good point, is these are archived on our website. And so if you didn't get a chance to see them, they're short, they're only about 30 minutes, and they're very practical about specific strategies that you can use for students with disabilities. So I would encourage you to check them out if you get a chance.
And I had some consultants in Logan County that watched different ones of these and have referenced these as well to provide to teachers, whether it's through NTI or we start up next year. So yeah, they were beneficial.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. So this kind of goes back to what Greta was saying earlier. What are some additional topics that you all would be interested in hearing about? So you can see the current topics that were already covered in April and May. What are some things that you would like to see moving forward, if we continue the webcasts?
Okay, I'm going to keep talking because nobody else is talking. So I would like to see more on related services.
Okay. Okay, any other thoughts?
Kim, this is Veronica Sullivan. I just want to ask a clarifying question. When you say related services, are you talking about in general, or are you talking about NTI setting, hybrid setting, all of the above?
I think all the above. I think the only guidance that we really have for related services is our KDE guidance document that is for, what is it, OTPT, SLPs, et cetera. So we have limited guidance overall for related services. And during NTI, it was even a little more difficult. Like, can we partner with people? Can we not for teletherapy? I just think different ways and different opportunities, because let's just face it, related service personnel are set in their ways. Any information, and with brand new teachers coming out of college, they don't know how to integrate related services sometimes. So I think anything to do with integration of services would be great too. That's just me talking. I would love to hear from other people.
Okay.
I know Wendy put in the chat box to continue social, emotional, and communication, and that goes to Troy's point as well. In preschool, for example, we have a topic, helping families understand the importance of routines and social emotional development during NTI. I think it would be helpful to help students understand the importance of that as well, to really go to that social emotional part to help teachers understand and have strategies on working with students on their social emotional health.
And I would like to add, just to second what Kim was saying about related services, I'm often at the mercy of what our related service providers tell me they can and can't do. That's not my area of expertise, obviously, in all the various fields that we oversee. So any guidance that you all are able to provide through this avenue would really go a long way to help with that, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I've got the related services. We've social emotional learning. And I think there's a few on the chat box that Joe might have mentioned that I can't see right now, but I'll be able to go back and look at those. Okay. Anything else that I missed? Okay. So in terms of frequency and timing, what are your thoughts with that? So the webcasts that we did in April and May, they were on a weekly basis and they were the same time and they were for 30 minutes each week. What are your all's thoughts about that? Should they, was the 30 minutes good in terms of timing? Do you think they should be longer than that? We'd love to get your all's thoughts on that moving forward in terms of the timing and how long they should last.
I'll speak to that a little bit. I really enjoyed the format because I sent out a daily email to our department just with some updates, and I really enjoyed being able to include the link to that and just provide a brief summary of what it is. They were all relatively short, very informative, and it was one more resource that I could throw at our staff not our staff, but our department, one more resource I could share with them to help them through some of the questions that they were experiencing out there in the trenches. So to answer your question, I like the format, I like the information, and I thought the once a week was great. I think if it was more than that, that probably would have been too much. I think maybe less. If it was like every other week, that might be too few. So that's just my opinion, though.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
I like the 30-minute format just because it's quick and it gets really the nuts and bolts. And then if teachers need more, they will look for more opportunities. But sometimes it's easier to find 30 minutes versus a 2-hour block of time. And I think that's really helpful for educators during this time.
Okay.
So if the schools go back to school, it would be nice if there was, an opportunity, maybe like just 30 minutes at the end of the day or something, just kind of adjusting the time, the time of day, depending on if we're in a actual classroom or school setting in the fall, but kind of looking at that, I think would be helpful.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts in terms of timing and length?
And if you all get other feedback from your region about other topics that they would like to see, just send an email to Amanda or Veronica, and we'll be glad to try and think of how we can build that in.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your input.
Thanks, Amanda. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, we have Damien, behavioral health for staff and students during COVID-19.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Let me make sure. I'll pull up the PowerPoint here.
And Damien, just so you know, I'm here.
Oh, awesome. Welcome. All right.
And Damien, if you need me to pull the presentation up, I can, or you can as well. Just let me know.
Well, can you see it?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So I'm Damien. I'm the program coordinator for comprehensive school counseling. I've heard from some of you. I've had a chance to present to some of you as well on graduation requirements or different things. So I'm happy to be with you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation thus far. I'm with an amazing colleague of mine. She is not only a colleague at KDE, but she also works for the Department of Behavioral Health. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Miriam.
Hi, I'm Miriam Silman. I am the co-lead on Project Aware from the Department for Behavioral Health and also the Trauma-Informed Care Program Administrator at the Department for Behavioral Health and in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And so I think I know a few people. I was for many, many years, almost 20, at the Center on Trauma and Children at UK.
Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you. We're going to get started with our guiding question, which is how can we appropriately respond to students and staff members after the pandemic and help improve their mental health? And in terms of mental health and talking about students and staff, we want to start with you. So go ahead and put in the chat box, where are you in terms of this happiness rating on a scale from 1 to 10? Where's your happiness level today? And then Miriam, if you wouldn't mind, let me know what's happening in there. Okay, Actually, I'm getting them on my phone. So I see an 8, 7.
We're seeing some 8s
Wow.
and 7s.
Wow,
Yeah.
what's going on? Man, DoSEs, I need to hang out with you guys. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I want to get everybody, even if you work at KDE, chime in. Love to hear from you. Joe, good for you. Okay. All right. So it's really important for us to kind of scan our bodies, scan our minds, understand what's happening with us. And we really can't help other people until we find ways to help ourselves. So think to yourself about, where you are. Many of you are at an 8. Many of you are at a 7. See some 5s and 6s on there, but what's it going to take for you to jump up 2 numbers? So put that in the chat box. What's it going to take for you and your personal, today? What will it take for you? Will it be getting outside? Will it be playing with the kids, talking to somebody on the phone? What's it going to take for you to jump up a couple numbers today? And you can't say getting off this call. Go ahead and put that in the chat box. Seven kids, wow. Get it. Kimberly, I'm right there with you. Yeah, Larry, I feel you on the hugger piece. Been hard on her. I'm sorry to hear that your high schooler is struggling. My goodness, all I see is Bird is the last name, but I am right there with you on the laundry and the dishes. I mean, this is crazy. Okay, so we've got to think about where we are, scan ourselves, and then really think about, what can we do to increase that happiness? And we need to do these little check-ins with our students and our staff as well. Being in a school, when we did check-ins, what I would do is before the school day, from 7:30 to 7:40, kids were allowed to kind of roam the hallways right before school started. So I would always find a different teacher to go up and just check on. And that went a long way. As a matter of fact, you probably know this, but putting a little, like a single Post-it on somebody's door or desk or whatever, and just saying, hey, just thinking about you, or want to make sure you're doing well, or you're crushing it right now, I'm just so proud of you, really goes a long way as well. So I would encourage you to encourage others to do this. Okay, so there's a lot of, there are many sources of stress right now during the pandemic. There is certainly stress about anxiety, with anxiety about exposure and illness. So what may have seemed like a small cough a few months ago and you really didn't think twice about, you may be concerned that you're now infected. Of course, limited connections to others and limited support system. We just saw that in the chat box. We're seeing this from not only students, but also our adults. Just that lack of cognitive stimulation or monotony, right? We really, really need that. We need to be able to feel like we're being productive and having these productive conversations. And that is certainly a cause of stress. Limited access to normal coping strategies is also one. For me, when I'm specifically thinking about students, my way of coping was to either go outside and shoot a basketball or play soccer. So when I can't do those things with other kids, that's going to be a stressor for me. Family members who are stressed, right? There's also there's potential financial stress, and we know for sure that there's food stress, losses and grief, and those losses don't necessarily have to be deaths. They may be just a loss of something that you are really looking forward to, like a beach vacation, or like a sporting event, or a prom, or graduation, or celebrating the last day of school with your colleagues. And certainly uncertainty is another cause of stress for sure. Signs of stress in students. So students may appear clingy, whiny, tearful, frightened, or anxious. As a matter of fact, we would always do something called the counselor corner, and the cafeteria, and we would always have kids, even, and this was just a regular day, we would always have kids. And I was at the high school level that would just come and want to sit with us every single day, because for those kids, adults, right, adults that they knew supported them, they really symbolized safety and compassion. We're going to see kids that are agitated, hyperactive, overreactive, irritable, impatient, aggressive, and even angry. We're hearing from kids on the Commissioner of Student Advisory Council that they're already experiencing friendships that are withdrawing from their circles. Right. We know that kids are going to be disengaged and lethargic. We always laugh because some of the kids on that group, they'll answer their Zoom calls and they'll participate while in bed. They just need that extra rest for their bodies. They might be depressed, sad, hopeless, or even suicidal. And if they are suicidal, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get them help in a bit. There may be poor concentration, limited comprehension, poor memory. Some of you guys are most likely being saying to yourselves, man, I'm experiencing that myself. Vague physical complaints, right? So the somatic issues, right? My stomach hurts and I just have this ongoing headache that won't go away. We know for a fact that many kids are really struggling to sleep. Out of fear, out of anxiety about what's going to happen, about potentially being exposed, or friendships or family members being exposed. There can even be appetite disturbance. Kids can even get in your face or seek attention that way. So what signs of stress are you seeing in your students? Put that in the chat box. And then how are you handling those stressors? For many of you, school just ended. So what were you seeing right up until the end of school? And then how did you handle those? I think everybody would benefit from that. For the sake of time, while you're typing in the chat box, I'll move on. It's really important to understand the signs of stress in your staff. I loved hearing one of you say earlier that it will be a really volatile situation if we have distressed students with distressed staff, right? So we need to be able to understand the signs of stress in our staff and then really be able to respond to it. So many of our staff are going to be anxious, fearful, depressed, sad, withdrawn, less engaged, or absent. We always look forward to that very last day of school where we could really celebrate as a group and cheer our kids out. Our staff members didn't have that opportunity to honor each other's work and the hard work that they had all year and to celebrate it together. So for those reasons, they might appear irritable, impatient, frustrated, angry, explosive, or overreactive, agitated, poor concentration, poor memory. Again, those vague physical complaints, they may be overwhelmed, confused. They might have difficulty with problem solving or making decisions, and they may even experience loss of creativity or lack of motivation. Many times that's because they're juggling quite a bit, right? It's not juggling, being a special educator or being a DoSE. You're also juggling, how do I help my high school child while she's really struggling during this time while also being good at my job. Okay, so signs of stress in staff. If you could add that to the chat box as well. What signs of stress do you see in your staff and how are you handling that? Just going on what you guys said previously about your students, Troy said that students often were assigned much more schoolwork than normal with limited help to accomplish it. That is tough. That's a tough thing to hear, Troy.
Damien, I hate to interrupt you. Is there any way that we can speed it along just a little bit? I know our staff wants to participate with you, but we have to get Jared Sloan in still, and we're on a limited time. I hate to do that to you, but thank you.
Sure. So there's also a risk for increased stress response. So recent loss or history of significant loss, past or current exposure to trauma, pre-existing behavioral health concerns, or a history of such. There can also be limited support systems. We've discussed that, feelings of isolation, and poor coping skills and supports. So what schools can do is you can become aware and you can also teach awareness. You can build resilience and you can also create crisis plans. We've recently released many documents on our COVID-19 counseling page, which address loss and bereavement, virtual loss and bereavement crisis plans. So you can have that access to that. I'll put that link in there. And then we actually just released a great document that kind of helps you address some of these other things that you see on here. So Miriam, I'll let you take over from here.
Okay, so when we're thinking about awareness, we just want to make sure that staff is really thinking about ways that they're observing, they're listening to students, and this can be happening both virtually if we continue with NTI, but also certainly when we get back in, and then making linkages to resources for behavioral health supports, and also maybe not formal behavioral health, but community partners who can help kids. And I just want to remind everybody that, the big thing around trauma's impact on kids is that when we're in that stress response, when we are in that survival mode, our thinking brain is not as engaged. And so we have to make sure that kids are feeling safe physically and psychologically, and also that their basic needs are being met before they're even ready to learn. And we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like when kids get back. So this part is really critical. Damien, next slide, please. And so just to, elucidate some of that, we talked about that when we're listening to both our students and their families, and also be listening to your staff and the community. They are going to be great guides for you in that way, and linking within your districts and beyond. Next slide, please. So we want to remember always that resilience is not something that is heritable. It is something that we can build and create, and we can learn to be more resilient. And we, as adults in children's lives, have a really critical role to play in doing that. So thinking about these 6 elements of resilience that can happen within the school context, connections are critical. Safety, as we said. Do not undervalue the role of nutrition and exercise. One of the things that we're pretty sure about is it's going to be really hard for kids to physically get back to sitting in school for long periods of time. So there's probably going to need to be lots more movement breaks and different ways of doing things to accommodate that. We know that building competence builds resilience, but we also know that it may be hard for kids to get back to academics. So think broadly about how you can support kids and build competence. And that may even be something that gets built into planning for kids as they get back, or if there's planning for NTI, giving kids choices, giving them a voice and a way to make suggestions and have input both into their own IEPs and their own plans, as well as into things that are happening at the aggregate level at the classroom or school level, is critical for empowerment. And teaching kids self-regulation skills is probably going to become even more important as we get back to school. These are things that can happen even in a virtual classroom and environment. And so we would just encourage you to support the social emotional kinds of strategies that are happening, mindfulness, focusing strategies. This is good for their social and emotional well-being as well as for their academics. So you can keep going through. You can see these slides when you get the slides. When we think about a crisis plan, just a few things to remember, making sure that crisis plans at the school level have representation from across the school. So for you all, that's making sure that the needs of all of the different kinds of exceptional students that you serve are being addressed in that crisis plan, and making sure that the social and emotional side of it is inherently a part of the plan, that it's not an afterthought. And also building in some positives there. So how can you build in some ways that kids are going to come in and have something positive and feel really good, and staff as well in that way. And so we know that we want kids and students to be ready to learn and teach. Damien, go ahead and go on to the next one. I think the last one is just about just to remember that this is all predicated on this notion of compassion, that as we get back to school, we want to be really flexible, adaptable, and part of that is going to come from a spirit of generosity and grace that we extend to one another, but we also extend to ourselves. And as leaders, you can really model that and help staff to remember that. So we go back to that famous trauma lens question of asking what's happened, not what's wrong, and focusing on the strengths in that way. So thanks and good luck getting back to school and working with NTI.
Perfect. Thank you both. And I apologize again for rushing. I know we got to get Jared in, and because he talks about, you know, the most fun thing to talk about is CCEIS. But thank you, Jared. You have the floor.
All righty. Thanks. And thanks for putting me last. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Jared Sloan. Know a lot of you all, but my role here at the department is working with comprehensive. Actually, let me go ahead and pop this on the screen here so that those of y'all who may not necessarily be familiar with the acronyms can kind of see the acronym here. Just want to make sure, and I'm sure you all can see it, but I always like to double check. Can we see everything okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So CCEIS, which is Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, and Coordinated Early Intervening Services, CEIS. CCEIS is mandatory or required for districts who have been found to have significant disproportionality. And I imagine a lot of you all are well versed with that. I know one or two of you on the call are extremely well versed with it because you are in two of my districts there. CEIS is voluntary, so districts can elect to take up to 15% of their special education IDEA funds and fund voluntarily services for to help mitigate some sort of area that they suspect they might be identified in the future for significant disproportionality, or just because they want to. There really doesn't have to be an impetus to do that. So what I'm actually here to talk to you all about today, and I know we've got about 10, 11 minutes left, so I won't belabor the point. What I'm here to talk to you all about today is our funding matrix. And the reason we're here today, and Greta had asked that I come to the group and maybe kind of get some feedback from you all and kind of communicate what's happened, is I left the department for about 2 years. I had previously done this along with RTI and some other ESS and some other things previously. And when I left the department, you know, Chris Thacker and April Pieper took over CCEIS and CEIS and did a really good job during that time. But one of the things that I wanted to do coming back was make sure that we are updating and that we're kind of bringing up to speed some different things and listening to district feedback in terms of what's needed, what's not needed, what we might need to open up. So what you're seeing today is the result of a little bit of a process that we've gone through. We went to 3 member districts, those folks who had CEIS or CCEIS, talked to their directors, talked to some finance folks, including Todd Elder with JCPS, some folks in Breathitt County, some folks in Warren County, to kind of get some feedback on what needed to be opened up that wasn't necessarily available for districts. And so we did that. We also went with some folks at the department, and I got them all together and said, hey, take a look at this matrix and really give some feedback on what needs to be changed. Now, as a result of that feedback, we did make some fairly minor changes. The first one that we opened up was code 0533. And I know you are sitting there going, boy, this sounds like an exciting conversation. It is an exciting conversation because it opens up the opportunity for districts to do more with some money that's already got some restrictions on it due to having to use it for comprehensive coordinated early intervening services. So this allows, and opening this up, and this came on feedback from a district, and they pay their online services, so they'll pay for different items out of this account. And so they requested that we open up 0533. We did open that code up to allow districts to purchase the online programs for programmatic needs and services. So we wanted to make sure and listen to the districts and understand that we did need to open up this additional code for them. So we did open that one up. The next one that we opened up, and this was, And those of y'all who have dealt with finances kind of understand that this code is a Pandora's box. And we were very cautious about opening it. And this was as a result of a fairly lengthy conversation with the folks that we sought feedback from. We did open up 0651, which is the supplies technology rated. And this was actually stressed by the districts. They only wanted this open to purchase Chromebooks and computers for district staff. Previously, it was approved on an as-needed basis. So, and by the way, any of these codes, if you all have been a CEIS district or a CCEIS district or had any dealings with it, I'm always open to listen to if there's a true need to open up any code. But we are obviously restricted by some federal requirements, some state requirements in terms of what we can open and can't open in terms of rules. But we did open up this code, and we did that with the codicil on there that it could only be used for purchase of devices for faculty and staff. And it had to be basically you have to contact the department in order to use that. And folks, I'm rushing through this really fast, so to try to give you some time here to comment if you want to. The final one that we did open up, and this was primarily on feedback from one of our larger districts, was 513, 514, and 519. And this allows transportation, including contracted bus services, bus tokens so students who receive those services can be paid, they can provide those bus tokens to kids who stay for these services. So this is primarily for services outside of the school day. A lot of folks don't think of offering these services outside of the regular classroom environment, when in fact, one of the easiest and best ways that you can offer this additional layer of support is after school or even before school, depending on what the situation may be. And you're not always going to have that transportation to do that. Now, obviously, we're in a much different place right now than we normally are. But in a regular, quote unquote, regular school setting, this is something that was requested to be opened up just for that reason. So again, we did add that, but only with the provision that the services are offered outside of the school day. So I went through that very, very fast. So let me see if we have any questions or comments. Again, the primary reason that we wanted to bring it to the group today was to see if there are any additional codes, any additional thoughts on opening up some other options for usage by our districts.
Jared, I think overall everybody has been very thoughtful about what our staff needs, what our student needs as far as technology, et cetera. I have not personally heard of any complaints about there's not availability. So, I mean, I think that's been great. So.
Well, and I appreciate that, Kevin. You and I have talked several times that I want to be able, and we want to be able to open up as much for our districts to be able to use as we can. And that's the main point is if there's even a possibility that we can open it up, even if you go on there, if a district goes on there and you see that it says no, make a phone call to me, shoot me an email, and I'll talk with Greta, obviously, and see what we can do maybe to open that up for a district.
Yeah. Any of these directors that work directly with or with their finance people, I get limited FaceTime with mine, but when I was in a smaller district, for sure, that's, I could know those codes by heart. So any suggestions, I'm sure, from other people would be great.
Sure. And of course, we've got you and another DoSE on here who on our advisory panel who have had firsthand experience with CEIS and CCEIS. So that's a positive as well.
Positive?
Now, come on, Kim, it is a positive. So
it's been good. Great stuff. All right, any questions for Jared?
Now, this is Larry Begley. I'll just back up what Jared said since I'm the other DoSE that's on here. that he means it whenever he says it, that his line is available and number. He will answer the calls and answer the questions, and he's always been there for us, and I appreciate that. So if anybody does have any questions, he means it when he says that he's all right with taking a call.
Larry, I appreciate that. And you know, one of the things that I do want to kind of stress to folks, and I want to try to do a better job of this going forward, it's hard in this environment right now, is the availability of voluntary and the fact that it doesn't have to be the full 15% that districts use, that they can use as little or as much as they want, up to that 15% if they want, if they've got a need for it.
Perfect.
Thanks a lot, Jared. You got that done in a short amount of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
And Kim, the only other thing that we have is we have created a Google form that has questions for an exit slip. And so I'll put the link in the chat right now. And it's also in the presentation that's found on our Google Drive. And it just says, the last slide says exit slip. We really are concerned about getting your feedback. And so there may have not been an opportunity for you to provide that today during the meeting. So at this link, please type in your answers to the questions for us. That really helps us plan. And we really appreciate your help and being with us today. And so Kim, I'll let you close it out. I just wanted to mention the exit slip.
Kim, I think you're on mute, or at least I can't hear you.
I'm Italian. I talk with my hands.
Yeah, Kim. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Thanks.
We were trying to figure it out.
I know we had a lot of presentations, and I know Joe and I discussed too that maybe a little less presentations next time, so we have more of an opportunity to talk to each other and gain some feedback, especially as these days are going on and what next steps are. But once you fill out the exit slip, we're ready to adjourn. So our next meeting, we have not set the next meeting. Is that correct, Joe?
That's correct. And we're going to meet quarterly. So we, Kim, we can try to get together and look at calendars and try to, do a seasonal meeting similar to what we do for our State Advisory Council, but probably not quite as long, a couple hours for this meeting usually.
Perfect. All right. It sounds fantastic. So it is 2:59 and we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all. Have a great summer.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Great discussion.
Thanks.